Consciousness returned like a software update that no one had asked permission to install. It arrived in polite increments, a low vibration, a faint chime that suggested the machine was proud of itself, and the uncomfortable realization that breathing had become a supervised activity. He tried to open his eyes and failed, which felt rude, considering how long he had been asleep. Somewhere nearby, something cleared its throat. Not a human throat. It sounded as if metal had learned manners. "Welcome back," said a voice that had practiced patience for years. "Please remain calm. Your organs are still negotiating jurisdiction." He wanted to reply with something clever, or at least profane, but his mouth produced a noise that suggested a drowning seal. The machine seemed pleased anyway. A gentle pressure adjusted beneath him, gravity recalibrating with the delicacy of a host fluffing pillows. Time, he realized dimly, had continued without his permission. Light filtered in, not harshly, but with the confidence of technology that knew it was superior to eyelids. Shapes resolved into equipment that hummed, glowed, and very clearly did not belong to the century he remembered. A transparent interface drifted closer, displaying symbols that hesitated before rearranging themselves into his language, then apologizing for the delay. 19 years out of date, it said. That seemed optimistic. Then she stepped into his field of vision, and the room shifted in a way no machine could explain. She moved like someone who knew the space intimately, as if it had memorized her footsteps. When she smiled, it wasn't the rehearsed curve of a professional greeting, but something worn smooth by repetition. Relief crossed her face first, then something warmer, and finally something that made his stomach tighten. "Oh, good," she said. "You're awake. I was starting to worry you'd miss our anniversary." He tried to process that sentence, failed, and settled for blinking. The machines interpreted this as progress and played a soft, celebratory tone. She leaned closer, speaking to the interface with affectionate irritation, telling it not to encourage him too much. He already had an ego problem. That oddly felt familiar. "I'm sorry," he managed, his voice sounding borrowed. "Do we know each other?" She laughed, a sound that cut through the sterile air like a small rebellion. "That depends," she said. "Do you count 20 years of uninterrupted commitment as knowing?" He attempted to sit up. The bed disagreed. Gravity, it turned out, had opinions now. She placed a hand on his shoulder, steady but careful, as if she'd done this before. The machines quieted at her touch. That was unsettling. "You're my husband," she said, as if clarifying a seating arrangement. "Or, to be precise, you are the man I married according to my people's customs, which are legally binding in 7 systems and emotionally binding in all the others." His brain stalled. Somewhere inside it, a small committee convened to discuss panic but adjourned due to exhaustion. "I think," he said slowly, "there may have been a mistake. The last thing I remember, I was going into surgery." "Yes," she replied brightly, "that was the beginning." She gestured around them, and the room responded, lights dimming, systems lowering their voices as if eavesdropping was impolite. Outside the transparent wall, a station curved away into a starfield that looked far too organized to be accidental. Ships passed like thoughts he no longer recognized. "You've been very resilient," she continued. "Unconscious but resilient. You snore in 3 distinct rhythms, by the way. I cataloged them during the 3rd power outage." He stared at her, the galaxy, the impossible stretch of time compressed into her calm expression. Humor arrived, uninvited but necessary. "So," he said, "is this the part where you tell me I owe back rent?" She smiled again, softer this time. "No," she said, "this is the part where you decide who you are now that you're finally here." The machines hummed, waiting. The stars did not. He woke up again, which was apparently something the galaxy now expected him to do regularly. This time there was no dramatic return of consciousness, no ceremonial hum. Just a quiet awareness that someone had adjusted the lighting without asking him, and that his body felt like it had been borrowed, upgraded, and returned with missing instructions. A small hovering sphere drifted into view and paused, as if judging him. "Good morning," it said. "Statistically speaking, is there a version where I don't wake up married?" he asked. The sphere blinked. That option was removed after year 6. Before he could demand an explanation or a lawyer, the room shifted. Walls slid aside with the casual confidence of architecture that had given up on permanence. The station beyond revealed itself in fragments, movement, sound, the distant pulse of engines sinking to something larger. He swung his legs off the bed and nearly fell, saved only by the sudden appearance of a gravity assist that caught him mid-complaint. "Careful," her voice said, amused but alert. "You're still calibrated to a planet that no longer exists in that configuration." "That's comforting," he muttered. "Does my home world know?" She handed him a garment that adjusted itself around his confusion. "Your home world filed 3 appeals and a poetry anthology. Both were rejected." They walked slowly at first, then with growing confidence, through corridors that seemed to anticipate her presence. Screens lit up with greetings she waved away. Machines asked her questions she answered without thinking. He noticed this with a mix of gratitude and unease. "You're very involved," he said. "Yes," she replied. "I've been here a long time." "So have you, just differently." They passed a viewing chamber where a cluster of children, various shapes, mostly upright, pressed against the transparent barrier. One pointed at him. Another asked if he was the sleeper. She corrected them gently. "He's awake now." The children lost interest immediately. That stung more than it should have. She guided him into a rehabilitation bay where devices politely argued over how much assistance he needed. One suggested a full exoskeletal frame. Another proposed motivational encouragement. He vetoed both and compromised on a cane that projected sarcastic commentary with each step. "So," he said, after the cane informed him his posture was disappointing, "you've been taking care of me for 20 years." "Yes." And at no point did anyone say, "Maybe wake him up before committing to a lifelong bond." She smiled. "You were very convincing while unconscious." "That seems legally questionable." "Only in your culture." They paused, not dramatically, just enough for the moment to exist. The station continued around them, indifferent but alive. He realized then that he wasn't being rushed. No one was demanding gratitude, affection, or understanding on a schedule. "I don't remember you," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "You don't owe me memory." The cane chimed. Emotional sincerity detected, switching to silent mode. He laughed despite himself. It felt strange but good, like testing a muscle that hadn't been used since another lifetime. "So what happens now?" She considered this, tilting her head in a way that suggested thought, not programming. "Now," she said, "you learn how the galaxy works, and I learn who you are when you're awake." He took another step. This time he didn't stumble. Somewhere deep in the station, a clock reset itself, confused but hopeful. Memory did not return the way everyone promised it would. It didn't flood back or snap into place or reveal a hidden archive labeled important life events. Instead, it arrived like unsolicited messages from strangers, brief, oddly emotional, and impossible to verify. They told him this was normal. He was seated in a neural recovery chamber that politely refused to call itself a chair. The surface adjusted under him, reacting to thoughts he hadn't finished yet. Across from him, a lattice of light unfolded and refolded itself, searching for patterns inside his head with the delicacy of a cat walking across expensive equipment. "Just relax," the system said. "Think of nothing." "That's what got me into this mess," he replied. A ripple of amusement passed through the observers behind the glass. She was there too, leaning against a console, arms crossed, pretending not to watch too closely. He noticed that she always pretended at the wrong moments. The lattice pulsed. Something brushed the edges of his awareness, not an image, not a sound, but a feeling. Waiting. Long, patient, stubborn waiting. It startled him so badly he jerked forward. "Hey," he said, "that's not my emotion." "No," she said softly, "that one's mine." The system paused, recalibrating. Cross-emotional resonance detected. This is statistically romantic. Turn it off, he said quickly, before it starts playing music. The light dimmed, though the echo lingered. He rubbed his temples, unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with fear. So you talked to me, while I was asleep? Yes. Like updates or speeches. Arguments, she said, mostly one-sided. You were very unreasonable. He smiled despite himself. Humor slipped in where tension might have taken root. Did I at least win? She considered. You never changed your mind. I suppose that counts. They left the chamber with his head buzzing and his sense of time misbehaving. The station felt different now, not unfamiliar, but not neutral either. Screens displayed notices he couldn't read fast enough. Species passed them who glanced once, then twice, as if he were a historical artifact that had learned to walk. In a communal space shaped around an artificial star, they stopped. The light there wasn't warm exactly, but it knew how to imitate warmth convincingly. There's something you should know, she said. That sentence never ends well. She ignored that. In my culture, remaining with someone who cannot respond is considered binding. You don't abandon a life just because it's quiet. And if the quiet life wakes up and says, "Sorry, wrong century," then, she said, meeting his eyes, they are free. The word landed heavier than expected. Free meant choice. Choice meant responsibility. He survived 20 years by doing nothing at all, and now the galaxy had the audacity to hand him agency. A service unit rolled past and paused. Congratulations, it said. Your marriage has reached an awake state. Is there a return policy? He asked. Only emotionally, the unit replied, then rolled on. She laughed. Not politely, genuinely. It broke something loose in him, something tight he hadn't known he was carrying. I don't know who I was, he said, before. You don't need to, she replied. I didn't marry who you were, I married who stayed. They stood there, orbiting an artificial sun, two people bound by time that only one of them had lived. Around them, the station continued its endless routines, ships docking, systems updating, lives moving forward. For the first time since waking, he didn't feel late. He felt present. The choice arrived without ceremony, which felt appropriate. A panel unfolded from the wall while he was struggling with a dispenser that refused to release coffee unless addressed politely. The panel waited until he finished apologizing to the machine, then displayed two options in text that deliberately avoided emotional adjectives. Remain. Depart. No countdown. No warning chime. The galaxy, it seemed, had learned manners too. She watched him read it, saying nothing. He realized she had done that often, standing nearby, present without pressure, like a constant variable he'd only recently learned how to solve. If I leave, he said, do I get a brochure, a map, a refund on the coma? You get transport, she replied. A stipend, a recommendation letter that says you are resilient, confusing, and surprisingly difficult to give up. He smiled. The coffee machine finally surrendered its prize, producing a cup that tasted like optimism filtered through regret. He took a sip and grimaced. Some things never advance. They walked the long way to the observation ring, not because it was scenic, but because it let the conversation stretch without snapping. Along the way, he passed systems he now understood, people who nodded at him without staring, and a service unit that informed him his bone density had opinions. At the ring, stars curved gently around them, obedient to physics he no longer found intimidating. He leaned against the railing, steady now, without assistance, without commentary. I was afraid, he said. Not of you. Of being indebted. She nodded. I was afraid you'd feel owned. They shared that quietly. Then he laughed. For the record, if I had known sleeping through 20 years would result in marriage, I would have negotiated better terms. You tried, she said. You drooled. That broke the last of it. He turned to face her fully, aware of how different he felt from the man who had woken up panicking at a smiling stranger. I don't remember choosing you, he said. But I remember choosing now. The panel chimed softly as if clearing its throat. He reached out and pressed remain. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms, no confetti. The panel simply folded itself away, satisfied. Somewhere, a database updated his status from patient to resident, then hesitated and added family. She exhaled a breath she'd been holding for years. "You're sure?" "No," he said, "but I'm awake." They walked back together, discussing mundane futures, work he might do, languages he'd mangle, holidays he'd misunderstand. He found himself asking questions that weren't about the past. She answered without guarding her voice. Later, as the station dimmed into its night cycle, he lay beside her, not monitored, not suspended, just present. He listened to the hum of systems that no longer sounded impatient. "I missed a lot," he said. "You survived it," she replied. He thought of the man he'd been certain, hurried, convinced time was abundant. That man had slept through a lifetime. This one had learned to arrive slowly. Outside, stars continued their indifferent dance. Inside, something steadier had formed. Not owed, not assigned. Chosen. He closed his eyes not to escape but to rest, and for the first time in 20 years, sleep felt like a promise he fully intended to keep. The decision didn't arrive as a question this time. It arrived as routine. He was helping recalibrate a stasis bay, his hands steadier now, his body no longer negotiating with gravity like a hostile diplomat, when the system flagged his status for final resolution. A polite tone sounded, the kind reserved for updates that expected cooperation. "Your transitional period has concluded," the station announced. "Please confirm long-term designation." He wiped his hands on a cloth that immediately informed him it was not designed for emotional moments. Across the bay, she looked up, already knowing. She always knew before the systems did. That, he had learned, was not technology. That was time. They walked together to the registry alcove, passing places that no longer felt borrowed. He nodded to a technician who waved back and asked if he was still married or if that had been a temporary medical condition. He replied that the prognosis was stable, possibly chronic. The alcove activated, projecting a familiar pair of options: citizenship alignment, residency path, relational status. The last one blinked, uncertain. "Before you choose," she said, "there is something I should say." He leaned against the wall, relaxed enough now to let silence exist without panicking. "If this is a speech, I want it on record that I'm bad with emotional ambushes." She smiled faintly. "You don't owe me continuation. What we had was built in stillness. What we would have will be built in motion. Those are not the same commitment." He absorbed that. The man he used to be would have rushed to reassure, to promise. This one took a breath and felt the weight without flinching. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm still here." He reached out and selected the designation that merged his status fully into the station's living registry. Partnered present, awake. The system paused, then chimed. Confirmation accepted. Welcome to ongoing time. Somewhere nearby, a maintenance drone played celebratory music that was absolutely the wrong genre. He laughed, loud and unguarded, startling himself with how natural it felt. Life settled into a rhythm that didn't ask permission. He took on work helping other long-term patients wake, using humor where fear gathered too tightly. He learned her people's holidays, misunderstood half of them, and was forgiven for all. They argued about trivial things, temperature preferences, the ethics of sentient appliances, and those arguments ended not in uncertainty